They tossed my bedding onto the freezing garage floor, just so my brother could have a fake livestream studio. I thought I had hit rock bottom, but I was wrong. Salvation was shivering behind a stack of old tires. I never guessed that sharing half a sandwich with a homeless girl would earn me a seat at the billionaire's table. Now those who treated me like trash are begging at my feet. Want to know exactly how that feels? My name is Sharon Brookfield. If you had asked me who I was yesterday morning, I would have told you I was a 34-year-old forensic auditor who could track a hidden wire transfer across 3 continents in under 20 minutes. I would have told you I was the dutiful daughter who paid the mortgage, the electricity bill, and the internet bill that kept my brother connected to his delusions. But tonight, as I stood in the driveway with the Chicago wind whipping sleet against my cheeks, I realized I was none of those things. To the people inside the house I paid for, I was nothing more than an obstacle. It had been a brutal 14-hour shift. My eyes were burning from staring at spreadsheets, hunting for a missing $50,000 in a client's ledger. All I wanted was a hot shower and the silence of my bedroom. Instead, I found my life scattered across the frozen grass. My duvet was a sodden lump of gray near the mailbox. My forensic accounting textbooks, expensive hardcovers that had taken me years to pay off, were splayed open like dead birds, their pages fluttering and dissolving in the wet snow. My clothes were piled in black garbage bags that had been tossed carelessly, some of them split open, spilling my professional blazers into the mud. I stood there for a long moment, my brain refusing to process the visual data. It was a glitch in reality. Surely, I had pulled into the wrong driveway. But no, there was the peeling paint on the porch railing I had promised to fix next spring. There was the Honda Civic my brother, Kevin, refused to park on the street because he claimed it might get scratched, occupying the prime spot while I parked on the curb. I stormed up the steps, my key jamming in the lock because my hands were shaking so badly from a mixture of hypothermia and rage. When I shoved the door open, the blast of warm air that hit me felt like an insult. The house smelled of roasting chicken and cinnamon, a cozy domestic scene that completely contradicted the wreckage on the lawn. My mother, Linda, was sitting on the beige sofa I had bought with my Christmas bonus 2 years ago. She was flipping through a magazine, a glass of red wine in her hand. Kevin was pacing the living room, holding his phone up, testing angles. "You're home," Linda said. Not looking up, her tone was casual, as if she were commenting on the weather. "Close the door. You're letting the heat out." "My stuff," I choked out, pointing a trembling finger toward the window. "My books. My bed. Why is my entire life on the front lawn?" Kevin stopped pacing and sighed, rolling his eyes as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum in a supermarket. "Relax, Sharon. We had to make some executive decisions while you were out playing with your calculator." "Executive decisions?" I stepped into the room, dripping melting snow onto the hardwood. "Kevin needs the space," Linda said, finally looking at me. Her eyes were hard, devoid of any maternal warmth. "He is launching his lifestyle brand next week. He needs a proper office for his live streams. He cannot be filming in the dining room anymore. It looks unprofessional." "So you threw me out?" I asked, my voice rising. "I pay the mortgage on this house. Mom, I pay for the high-speed internet Kevin is using right now. That is my room." "It was the master bedroom," Kevin corrected, smoothing back his hair. "It has the best lighting. Besides, Tiffany is coming over this weekend. You know, the girl whose father owns the dealership chain. I can't bring her back to a house where I don't have a dedicated workspace. It ruins the aesthetic. She's high value. Sharon, you wouldn't understand." "You destroyed my property," I said, ignoring him and staring at my mother. "My textbooks are ruined. Do you know how much those cost?" Linda stood up then, her face twisting into that familiar expression of disdain she reserved solely for me. "Always about money with you, isn't it? You are so petty. Your brother is on the verge of something massive. He is the future of this family. You? You are just a wage earner. Sharon, you trade hours for dollars. Kevin is building an empire. He needs support, not your selfishness." "Selfishness?" I laughed. A harsh, jagged sound. I have supported this family since Dad left. I cover every single expense. And you hold it over our heads every day, Linda snapped. If you cannot support your brother's dream, then you can leave. But since I know you have nowhere else to go, we cleared out the garage for you. It is private. It is quiet. Perfect for someone who likes to work so much. The garage. It was a detached structure at the end of the driveway. Built in the 70s and never renovated. It had no insulation, no heating, and the roof leaked. It was where we stored the broken lawnmowers and the boxes of junk Kevin refused to throw away. You expect me to sleep in the garage? I whispered. It is 10 degrees outside. There are plenty of blankets, Linda said, sitting back down and sipping her wine. Stop being dramatic. Kevin needs the room. End of discussion. Now go get your things before they get wetter. You are dripping on my rug. I looked at them. My mother, comfortable and cruel, and my brother, smug and useless. I could have fought. I could have called the police. I could have stopped paying the bills right then and there. But the exhaustion was a physical weight on my shoulders. I was a forensic auditor. I dealt in logic and facts. The fact was, they were on the deed. The fact was, if I left now, I had zero savings because I had spent it all fixing the furnace last month. I turned around and walked back out into the cold. It took me an hour to drag what was salvageable into the garage. The space was a nightmare. The air inside was stagnant, heavy with the chemical tang of old motor oil and mildew. The concrete floor radiated a bone-deep chill that seeped through the soles of my boots. I cleared a small space between a stack of rotting cardboard boxes and a rusted workbench. I laid down a tarp I found, then my damp mattress, and finally piled every dry blanket I had managed to rescue on top. There was no light, only the faint orange glow of the street lamp filtering through the grime-streaked window. I sat on the mattress, wrapped in 3 coats, shivering so violently my teeth chattered. I could see the warm yellow light of the kitchen window across the yard. I could see Kevin's silhouette moving around in my old bedroom, setting up his ring light. I felt a hollow ache in my chest that had nothing to do with the cold. It was the realization that I was utterly alone. My family looked at me and saw a resource to be mined, not a human being. I was just about to close my eyes, trying to force myself into an uneven sleep, when I heard it, scritch, scratch. It came from the back corner of the garage, behind a wall of old tires Kevin had promised to sell 3 years ago. My first thought was rats. The garage was full of them. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from my bag, one of the few things I kept for emergencies, and clicked it on. The beam cut through the dusty air. "Get out," I hissed, my voice hoarse. "I am not in the mood." The noise stopped. Then, a small, stifled cough echoed in the silence. Rats did not cough. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stood up, gripping the heavy metal flashlight like a club. I stepped over a coil of garden hose and approached the tires. "Who is there?" I demanded, trying to sound authoritative, trying to channel the voice I used when interrogating nervous accountants. "Come out, now!" There was a rustling sound, like dry leaves moving. Slowly, a head popped up from behind the rubber stack. It was not a burglar. It was not a monster. It was a girl. She looked to be about 8 years old. Her face was smudged with grease and dirt, her blonde hair matted into a bird's nest of tangles. She was wearing a thin, oversized hoodie that looked like it had been pulled out of a dumpster, and her lips were a terrifying shade of blue. She was shaking so hard the tires she was leaning against vibrated slightly. She stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, bracing herself as if she expected me to hit her. I lowered the flashlight. The adrenaline drained out of me, replaced by a wave of shock. This was not just a stray kid. This was a child in the advanced stages of hypothermia. She had wedged herself between the tires and the back of an old, broken window, a C unit, trying to leach whatever residual heat remained in the metal. "Hey," I said, my voice softening instinctively. I knelt down, keeping my distance so I wouldn't spook her. "I am not going to hurt you. What are you doing in here?" She didn't speak. She just pressed herself harder against the wall, pulling her knees up to her chest. I looked at the house. If I took her inside, Linda would scream about diseases. Kevin would probably live stream it. They would call the police, not to help her, but to have her removed like vermin. And looking at the sheer terror in this girl's eyes, I knew the last thing she needed was sirens and men in uniforms. I looked back at her. She was starving. I could see the hollows of her cheeks. "Are you hungry?" I asked. A tiny, almost imperceptible nod. I reached into my bag. I had half a ham sandwich left over from the vending machine at work. It was stale, the bread slightly hard at the edges, but to me, it was just leftovers. To her, it looked like gold. I held it out. She hesitated, her eyes darting from my face to the food. Then, she lunged. She snatched the sandwich with a speed that spoke of desperate survival and devoured it in 3 bites, barely chewing. "Slow down," I whispered. "It is okay." She finished the sandwich and looked at me, still wary. But the terror had receded just a fraction. She was shivering violently again. I didn't calculate the risk. I simply stood up, walked back to my makeshift bed, and grabbed my thickest wool blanket, the one thing that had stayed dry inside a plastic bin. I walked back and draped it over her shoulders. She flinched at first, but as the warmth of the wool hit her, she let out a long, shuddering breath and pulled it tight around her small frame. "My name is Sharon," I said quietly, sitting down on the cold cement a few feet away from her. "You can stay here tonight. It is not much, but it is better than the wind." She didn't answer. She didn't tell me her name. She just looked at me over the edge of the gray wool blanket, her blue eyes piercing through the gloom, in that freezing, miserable garage, surrounded by the wreckage of my life and the smell of gasoline. I felt a strange, magnetic pull. We were both discards. We were both unwanted things thrown out into the cold to make room for someone else's comfort. And as the wind howled outside, rattling the loose tin roof, I realized I wasn't just saving her in the dark. Her presence was the only thing keeping the absolute blackness of despair at bay. Over the next 3 days, the garage ceased to be a storage unit for broken lawn equipment and transformed into a fortress of secrets. My forensic training kicked in, the part of my brain that obsessed over logistics and spatial organization taking over to ensure our survival. I constructed a hidden alcove behind the wall of old tires and a stack of moth-eaten curtains Kevin had rejected for his studio. It was a pocket of space invisible from the doorway, just big enough for a small child to curl up in without being seen. I became a thief in my own home. I waited until the lights in the main house went dark. Usually around 2 a.m. after Kevin finished screaming at his video games, to sneak into the kitchen. I stole bread, peanut butter, apples, and bottles of water. I felt like a criminal creeping across the floorboards I had paid to refinish last summer, terrified that a creak would wake the people who were supposed to love me. The girl, whom I had started calling M in my head since she refused to speak, was a ghost. Her silence was not the quiet of a peaceful child. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of deep trauma. She did not make a sound when she ate, nor did she cry when the wind rattled the metal siding of the garage. She communicated entirely through her eyes, which tracked my every movement with an intensity that unsettled me. And through the grip of her small, cold hand, whenever I had to leave to use the bathroom at the gas station down the street, because I was forbidden from entering the house during the day, she would squeeze my fingers so hard her knuckles turned white. Kevin was the variable I could not control. He treated the garage as his personal dumping ground and me as his on-call servant. On the second afternoon, the door banged open without warning. I barely had time to kick a pile of dirty laundry over Emily's legs where she sat in the corner. Kevin stood there, backlit by the winter sun, holding a bag of trash. He wrinkled his nose, looking at me with pure disgust. "It smells like a wet dog in here," He sneered, tossing the bag onto the floor near my feet. Mom wants you to take this out. The garbage truck comes tomorrow morning. Do not forget like you did last week. I stood up, blocking his view of the corner. I did not forget. Kevin, you forgot to put the bin out. He laughed. A sharp, dismissive sound. Whatever. Oh, and I need $20. I am ordering pizza for the stream tonight. I do not have cash. I said, my heart hammering against my ribs as I saw the laundry pile shift slightly. Emily was moving. Figure it out, Kevin said, turning around. You are the accountant. Move some numbers around. When the door slammed shut, my knees gave out. I sank to the floor, pulling the laundry away. Emily was staring at me, her eyes wide, but she had not made a peep. She understood the danger. We were conspirators in a war against the world outside these aluminum walls. That evening revealed something that shifted my perception of her entirely. I had dug out an old radio from a box of my father's things, hoping to drown out the silence. It was a brick of a thing from the 90s, dead and silent, even with fresh batteries. I fiddled with the antenna and the dials for an hour, frustrated, before giving up and tossing it onto the workbench. I went to the corner to organize our small stash of food. When I turned back, static was hissing through the air. Emily was standing by the workbench. She had popped the back casing off the radio. Her small fingers were twisting 2 copper wires together with a precision that seemed impossible for an 8-year-old. She adjusted a capacitor, tapped the battery terminal, and suddenly, the clear sound of a jazz station filled the freezing air. She looked at me, not with pride, but with a simple, expecting gaze. She had fixed it in under 2 minutes. Where did you learn to do that? I asked, stunned. She just shrugged and went back to her corner, pulling the blanket over her head. This was not a street kid who had learned to scavenge. This was a child who understood mechanics, who had been taught how things worked. The mystery of her presence deepened, but I had no time to solve it because the next morning, my own life shattered completely. I was sitting on my mattress, using my phone's hotspot to check my work email. When the call came, it was not my direct supervisor, but the head of human resources, Sharon. The voice was clipped, professional, and icy. We are terminating your contract effective immediately. I froze, the phone slipping in my sweaty palm. Excuse me? On what grounds? My performance reviews are perfect. I just saved the firm $50,000 last week. We have received a complaint regarding a conflict of interest and breach of confidentiality. She recited, a major partner, Mr. Victor Vance, has flagged your recent audit of his subsidiary. He claims you manipulated data. Given his standing with the firm, we have no choice. Victor Vance. The name hit me like a physical blow. He was the man whose books I had been auditing, the man whose numbers had not added up. I had found discrepancies, money flowing into shell companies that did not exist. I was about to file a report. He had struck first, but that is a lie. I stammered, panic rising in my throat. I have the proof. If you let me show you the ledgers, your access has been revoked. Sharon, do not come to the building. Security has been notified. The line went dead. I sat there, staring at the screen. I was fired, blacklisted. In the world of forensic accounting, an accusation of data manipulation from a man like Victor Vance was a death sentence. I had no savings, I had no job, and I had a mouth to feed hidden behind a wall of tires. Before I could even process the catastrophe, the garage door opened again. This time it was Linda. She did not step inside. She stood at the threshold, wrapped in a fur coat I had bought her for her 50th birthday, looking at me like I was a stain on her property. Rent is due on the 1st, she said sharply, and the electric bill came. It is higher than usual. You need to transfer $1,500 to my account by tonight. Mom, I whispered, my voice breaking. I just lost my job. She did not blink. She did not ask if you were okay or what happened. Her face hardened into a mask of irritation. So? That is your problem. You think you can live here for free just because you failed? They fired me because I found fraud. I tried to explain, desperate for a shred of sympathy. I do not care about your excuses. Linda spat. You always have to be right, don't you? That is why nobody likes you. That is why you are 34 and sleeping in a garage. If you do not have the money by tomorrow, you are out. I will put your things on the curb. Kevin needs this space for storage anyway. She slammed the door. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The dam broke. I pulled my knees to my chest and buried my face in my hands, sobbing. It was an ugly, guttural sound that I tried to stifle, but the despair was too heavy. I had done everything right. I had followed every rule, and I was being crushed by people who broke them all. I felt a small hand on my cheek. I looked up through my tears. Emily was standing there. She had crawled out of her hiding spot. Her face was solemn. She reached into the pocket of her dirty hoodie and pulled something out. She pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers over it. I opened my hand. It was a heavy gold button, but it was not just a button, it was solid gold. I could tell by the weight, and on the face, intricately engraved, was a crest, a lion holding a key. It looked ancient. It looked priceless. I looked at Emily. She touched my wet cheek again, her eyes fierce and intelligent. She was telling me something without words. She was telling me that she was not just a stray. She was telling me that this nightmare was not the end. This is real gold, I whispered, running my thumb over the crest. Who are you? She did not answer, but for the first time in 3 days, the fear in her eyes was gone, replaced by a steeliness that matched the gold in my hand. We were at the bottom, but she had just given me the first tool to climb out. The silence of the garage was shattered, not by noise, but by heat. It was 2 a.m. when I woke up to the sound of ragged breathing. I rolled over and touched Emily's forehead. Her skin was scorching. She was burning up with a fever that had to be at least 103 degrees. Her small body was trembling violently under the wool blankets, and her teeth were chattering with a sound that rattled my bones. I panicked. I was an auditor. I solved problems with logic, but I could not audit a fever away. I needed medicine. I needed ibuprofen, cool water, and clean towels. I looked at the house. It was dark. The kitchen window was a black square against the siding. I had no choice. If I did not get her temperature down, she could go into shock. I whispered to her that I would be right back. She gripped my wrist, her eyes glassy and terrified, but she was too weak to hold on. I slipped out of the garage, the freezing wind cutting through my thin pajamas, and crept toward the back door. I used my old key, praying they had not changed the locks yet. The door creaked open. The house was warm, smelling of stale pizza and expensive perfume. I moved like a shadow toward the hallway bathroom where Linda kept the medicine cabinet. I grabbed a bottle of children's fever reducer and a washcloth. I was turning to leave when the kitchen lights blazed on. I froze. Kevin was standing there, holding a can of energy drink. He was wearing his silk pajamas, his hair messy from his gaming headset. He looked at me, then at the bottle in my hand. "Stealing again?" He smirked, leaning against the counter. "First electricity, now drugs? You are pathetic. Sharon, I need this. Kevin," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "I will pay you back. Just let me go. Who is it for?" He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "You do not have a fever. You are hiding something. I knew it. I heard you talking to someone down there." He lunged for my arm. I tried to pull away, but he was stronger than he looked. He dragged me toward the back door. "Let go of me!" I hissed. "Mom!" Kevin yelled, his voice echoing through the silent house. "Mom! Sharon has got an intruder in the garage." Linda appeared at the top of the stairs almost instantly, wrapped in her robe, her face a mask of irritation and suspicion. "What is going on?" she demanded. "She is harboring a squatter," Kevin shouted, shoving me out the door and following me into the cold. "Come on. We are going to see what kind of trash she is keeping in my studio." "No!" I screamed, scrambling after him. "Kevin, stop!" He ignored me. He marched to the garage and kicked the door open. He fumbled for the light switch, flooding the dingy space with harsh, yellow light. The hiding place behind the tires was good. But it was not good enough for a direct search. Kevin kicked the tires aside. There, curled in a ball and shielding her eyes from the light, lay Emily. She looked small, frail, and incredibly sick. I expected them to gasp. I expected a moment of human concern. Gross! Kevin recoiled, covering his nose with his sleeve. Look at her. She is filthy. Sharon, are you insane? You brought a homeless rat into our house? Tiffany is coming tomorrow. Linda stepped into the garage, her lip curling in revulsion. She did not look at the child's fever-flushed face. She looked at the grease on the blankets. Get it out of here, Linda commanded, her voice cold as ice. Right now. She is sick. Mom! I shouted, rushing over to shield Emily with my body. She has a high fever. She needs help, not to be thrown into the snow. She has probably got diseases, Linda shrieked, backing away. Lice, hepatitis, God knows what else. You have contaminated the whole property. Linda pulled out her phone. I am calling the police and social services. I am telling them you lured a vagrant child here. I will not let you ruin Kevin's reputation with this filth. Mom! No! I begged. They will put her in the system. She is terrified. Let them take her. Kevin sneered. He walked over to my workbench, looking for something to poke at Emily with, like she was a dead animal. As he moved, his elbow bumped the old radio I had fixed, knocking a pile of magazines off the shelf. Beneath them sat the small portable TV I used for background noise. The impact jarred the power button, and the screen flickered to life. It was tuned to a 24-hour news channel. The volume was low, but in the small garage, the anchor's voice was clear. Breaking news tonight in the search for the Sterling heiress. Billionaire Arthur Sterling has just increased the reward to $10 million for any information leading to the safe return of his granddaughter, Emily Sterling, who went missing 6 months ago. The screen cut to a photo. It was a school portrait. The girl in the photo was clean. Her hair was brushed and tied with a blue ribbon. She was smiling, but the eyes, those piercing, intelligent blue eyes, were unmistakable. I froze. Kevin did not notice. He was too busy laughing at my desperation. Linda was already talking to the dispatcher. Yes, my daughter has lost her mind. She is dangerous. We need an officer immediately. I looked down at Emily. She was staring at the TV screen. Her trembling had stopped. A look of sheer terror washed over her face, not at the police, but at the image on the screen. Then, she looked at me. She reached up, her small, hot hand gripping the collar of my shirt with surprising strength. She pulled me down. I leaned in, my ear hovering inches from her lips. For 3 days, she had been silent, but now, her voice came out, rasping and dry, like dead leaves scraping together. My billionaire grandpa wants you, she whispered. But do not let them take me. The man on the TV is the one who hurt him. I looked back at the screen. The image had changed. It showed Arthur Sterling standing next to his trusted financial advisor, the man leading the search efforts. It was Victor Vance. The room spun. Victor Vance, the man who had fired me, the man who had accused me of fraud to cover his own tracks. He was not just stealing from the company. He was controlling the search for the girl he had likely made disappear. If the police came, they would call the number on the screen. They would call Victor Vance. I looked at Linda, who was nodding smugly at the phone. They are sending a cruiser. It will be here in 5 minutes. 5 minutes? I did not think so. I did not calculate. The forensic auditor in me vanished, replaced by something primal. I grabbed the heavy flashlight from the workbench. Get back, I yelled, swinging the beam toward Kevin. He jumped back, surprised by the ferocity in my voice. Whoa, psycho. I scooped Emily up in my arms. She was burning hot, dead weight against my chest. I grabbed my car keys from the hook and the small bag of cash I had hidden under the mattress. Where do you think you are going? Linda demanded. Blocking the doorway. You stay right here and face the consequences of your stupidity. Move. Mom, I said. My voice was deadly calm. Move, or I will run you over. Something in my eyes must have terrified her, because she stepped aside, faltering for the first time. I ran. I sprinted through the snow, my boots slipping on the ice, clutching the $10 million girl to my chest. I threw her into the passenger seat of my beat-up sedan and slammed the door. Kevin was running after us now, realizing I was actually leaving. "You cannot take the car. I need it for tomorrow." I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I threw it into reverse, tires spinning on the slick driveway, spraying slush onto Kevin's silk pajamas. As I peeled out onto the street, I saw the flashing blue lights of a police cruiser turning the corner 2 blocks away. I slammed on the gas, turning left, heading away from the lights, away from the house that had never been a home, and into the darkness. I was unemployed, broke, and kidnapping the most famous child in America. But for the first time in my life, I knew exactly what I was fighting for. The first rule of forensic accounting is that every action leaves a digital footprint. If you buy a coffee, you are tracked. If you pass a toll booth, you are logged. If you turn on your phone, you are pinned to a map. I was driving a car registered to my name, carrying a phone that was essentially a homing beacon, and I had less than half a tank of gas. I pulled into a truck stop 30 miles outside the city limits. The first thing I did was power down my phone, remove the SIM card, and snap it in half. It felt like cutting off a limb, but it was necessary. Next, I ditched the car. It was painful to leave the only asset I owned unlocked with the keys in the ignition behind a dumpster. But the license plate would be flagged within the hour. We were ghosts now. I used the cash I had grabbed, about $400, to buy thick beanies, cheap sunglasses, and bus tickets back toward the city center. It sounds counterintuitive to run toward the danger, but the suburbs are empty and exposed. The city is dense. You can disappear in a crowd. For the next 48 hours, we moved. We never stayed in one place for more than 4 hours. We rode the subway from end to end, sleeping in the rocking cars surrounded by exhausted commuters who did not look twice at a woman and a sleeping child. When the stations closed, we blended into the homeless encampments near the library, or spent hours in the heated reading rooms pretending to read encyclopedias. I used my knowledge of banking cycles to survive. I knew that ATM cameras in older bodegas often overwrote their footage every 24 hours to save storage space. I withdrew cash only from these machines, never taking out more than $100 at a time to avoid triggering fraud alerts, and never in the same neighborhood twice. I was laundering my own existence, but we were not just running from the police. On the second day, while we were huddled in a booth at a crowded diner, sharing a plate of fries, I saw them, 2 men in black suits, wearing earpieces, moving through the crowd outside with a predatory precision that no beat cop possessed. They were scanning faces. They were looking for us. Victor Vance had sent his hounds. I pulled Emily's beanie lower and we slipped out the back exit, narrowly missing them. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but Emily was calm. Her fever had broken after I managed to get some medicine into her, and though she was weak, her mind was sharp. We found refuge in the back corner of the public library, hidden behind a stack of dusty periodicals. It was there, surrounded by the smell of old paper, that she finally told me the truth. "I did not get kidnapped," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ventilation system. "I ran away." "Why?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the library entrance. "Because of the tea," she said. "Uncle Victor makes Grandpa drink this special tea every night. He says it is for his heart, but I heard him on the phone. He was laughing. He said the old man was fading right on schedule. He said the arsenic levels were low enough to look like natural failure." I froze. The word arsenic triggered a memory in my brain. Connecting dots I had not realized were related. 2 months ago, I had flagged a series of invoices for a shell company called Chimera Logistics during my audit of Vance's subsidiary. They were importing rare chemical compounds for agricultural research. I had pushed for verification, and that was exactly when Vance had filed the complaint against me. He did not fire me for incompetence. He fired me because I was one invoice away from proving he was poisoning Arthur Sterling. My blood ran cold. This was not just a kidnapping case. This was an assassination in progress. I have to tell Grandpa, Emily said, her lower lip trembling. But if I go back, Victor will kill me too. He saw me listening. That is why I ran. I pulled her into a hug, realizing the magnitude of what we were up against. We were two specks of dust trying to fight a hurricane. I need to see what is happening out there, I said. I moved to one of the public computers and logged into a guest session. I navigated to a social media site, and my stomach dropped. My face was everywhere, but it was not a mugshot. It was a live stream. Kevin was on screen, tears streaming down his face. He was sitting in his room, my old room, with the lighting perfectly adjusted to catch the glint of his tears. Linda was next to him, clutching a tissue, looking like the picture of a grieving grandmother. Sharon has always been unstable. Kevin sobbed, his voice cracking theatrically. We tried to help her. We gave her a place to stay. But she was jealous. She was jealous of our happiness. She stole that poor little girl. She is dangerous. If you see her, do not approach her. Call the police. Call the number on the screen. The comments section was a river of vitriol. People were calling for my head. They were calling me a monster, a kidnapper, a psycho. Kevin had turned the entire city into a weapon against me. He was monetizing my destruction. I saw the viewer count, 50,000 people watching. He was finally getting the fame he wanted, built on the pyre of my life. I felt a wave of nausea. My own mother sat there, nodding along, confirming the lies. They did not care if I was innocent. They did not care about Emily. They were riding the wave of public sympathy, probably setting up a donation fund as we spoke. I closed the browser, my hands shaking. We cannot go to the police, I told Emily, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my throat. Vance controls the narrative. If the police find us, they will hand you over to child services, and Vance will have you back in his custody within an hour. And then you will disappear for real. So what do we do? Emily asked, looking up at me. I looked at the digital billboard across the street, visible through the library window. It was flashing an advertisement for the grand opening of the new Sterling Spire, the tallest building in Chicago. Arthur Sterling was scheduled to make a rare public appearance at the ribbon-cutting ceremony tomorrow morning. It was a fortress. Security would be tighter than the White House. It was suicide. But it was the only play we had. We are not going to the police, I said, standing up and buttoning my coat. We are going to crash a party. I grabbed Emily's hand. We walked out of the library and into the biting wind. I was done running. I was done hiding in garages and basements. If they wanted a villain, I would give them one. I was going to walk right into the lion's den, and I was going to bring the whole house of cards crashing down. The Sterling Spire pierced the gray Chicago skyline like a needle made of glass and hubris. It was the tallest building in the Midwest, a testament to Arthur Sterling's ego and genius. And today, its lobby was filled with the kind of people who spent more on a single lunch than I had earned in the last 3 years. We did not walk in through the front doors. We were not on the guest list. We were the invisible class, the people who scrubbed the toilets and emptied the bins. The people the elite looked right through. I had spent the last of our cash at a surplus store on 2 gray maintenance jumpsuits. They were too big, smelling of mothballs and stale storage, but they were the perfect camouflage. I tucked Emily's hair under a matching gray cap and smeared a little grease from the garage, which still stained my fingernails, onto her cheek. Just keep your head down, I whispered as we approached the service entrance at the rear of the building. You are carrying the toolbox. I am carrying the clipboard. If anyone asks, we are here to fix a leak in the HVAC system on the mezzanine. Emily nodded, her small hands gripping the handle of the rusted toolbox we had scavenged. She was trembling, not from cold this time, but from a cocktail of terror and hope. We walked past the security checkpoint at the loading dock. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The guard was distracted, arguing on his phone about a sports bet. I flashed an old ID badge I had kept from a previous audit at a manufacturing plant. He barely glanced at it, waving us through with a bored flick of his wrist. We were in. The bowels of the building were a maze of concrete corridors and humming pipes, but I had studied the blueprints online at the library. We navigated the service elevators, rising up toward the grand atrium where the ceremony was taking place. As the elevator doors slid open, the noise hit us. A wall of polite applause, clinking crystal, and the low murmur of expensive conversation. We stepped out into the shadows behind a massive velvet curtain. Through the gap, I could see them. There were hundreds of them, men in tuxedos and women in gowns that shimmered like liquid money. And there, on a raised dais at the far end of the room, stood Arthur Sterling. He looked older than his photos. He was seated in a wheelchair, a plaid blanket draped over his legs. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his hands shook slightly as they rested on the armrests. He looked like a man who was slowly fading away, exactly as Emily had described, standing right behind him, with a hand resting possessively on the back of the wheelchair. Was Victor Vance. He looked impeccable in a navy suit, his hair slicked back, projecting the image of the loyal lieutenant, the grieving family friend. He leaned down and whispered something in Arthur's ear, and the old man nodded weakly. The sight made my blood boil. It was a predator toying with its prey in front of a live audience. "We have to get closer," I hissed to Emily. When I create a distraction, "You run to him. Do not stop for anything." We crept along the perimeter of the room, using the large decorative pillars as cover. We were 20 feet away from the stage. 15, 10, then disaster struck. A security guard, a massive man with an earpiece and eyes like a hawk, stepped out from behind a pillar. He looked at me, then at my boots. Muddy, cheap hiking boots that clashed with the pristine uniform. He looked at Emily. He looked at the toolbox. "Hey," he barked, his voice cutting through the polite ambient noise. "You two, stop right there." The room went silent. Heads turned. "Run! Emily!" I screamed, shoving her forward. "Go!" I threw the clipboard at the guard's face. It was a pathetic weapon, but it bought us a second. The guard swatted it away and lunged at me. He hit me like a freight train. I slammed into the marble floor, the air exploding from my lungs. My vision blurred. I felt a knee press into my spine, pinning me down with crushing force. "Security!" the guard shouted into his lapel mic. "Breach in Sector 4. I struggled, scraping my chin against the cold stone, trying to lift my head. "Emily!" I wheezed. She was running. She was a blur of gray fabric and desperation, scrambling up the stairs of the stage. Victor Vance saw her coming. His eyes widened in shock, then recognition. He stepped forward to intercept her, his hand reaching out to grab her arm, but she was too fast. She ducked under his grasp and threw herself at the man in the wheelchair. "Grandpa!" The scream was raw, primal, and it echoed off the vaulted glass ceiling. It was the sound of a child who had seen hell and survived. Arthur Sterling's head snapped up. The haze in his eyes seemed to clear instantly. He looked at the dirty, greasy child clinging to his knees. "Emily?" he rasped, his voice trembling. He reached out, his shaking hands touching her face, tracing the familiar lines of her jaw, her nose. He pulled off her cap, and her blonde hair tumbled down. "Oh my God," he sobbed, the tears flowing freely. "Emily, you are alive." The room erupted, gasps, shouts, the flash of cameras blindingly bright. Victor Vance stood frozen for a split second, his face pale. He looked at Arthur hugging the girl. Then he looked at me, pinned on the floor by 2 more guards who had joined the fray. I saw the gears turning in his head. I saw the moment he decided to pivot. He pointed a finger at me, his face twisting into a mask of righteous fury. "Get her!" he bellowed, his voice booming over the chaos. "That is the woman! That is the kidnapper!" He turned to the crowd, playing the role of the hero perfectly. "She tried to extort us. She has been holding Emily hostage. Thank God she escaped." "No," I screamed, struggling against the weight of the guards. "He is lying. Arthur, listen to me. He is poisoning you." My face was shoved back into the marble. I tasted blood. I saw police officers sprinting through the main doors, guns drawn. They were coming for me. "Arthur!" I yelled again. Desperate, spitting blood onto the floor. "Check the tea. Ask him about the tea." But my voice was drowned out by the roar of the crowd and the orders of the police. "Get her up!" a sergeant commanded. I was hauled to my feet. My arms wrenched behind my back so hard I felt my shoulder pop. Cold steel cuffs bit into my wrists. Victor Vance was leaning over Arthur, putting a protective hand on Emily's shoulder, looking for all the world like the savior of the day. He looked at me across the room. He did not smile, but his eyes were cold and triumphant. He mouthed 2 words to me that only I could see. "Nice try. You are making a mistake," I shouted as the police dragged me toward the exit. "He is going to kill him. Check the accounts." Nobody was listening. The cameras were focused on the tearful reunion. I was just the villain being escorted off stage right. I was the crazy kidnapper, the disgruntled employee, the monster who had stolen a child. As they shoved me through the revolving doors and into the back of a squad car, I looked back one last time. I saw Emily clinging to her grandfather, burying her face in his chest. She was safe. That was what mattered. I had done my job. But as the siren wailed and the car lurched forward, taking me to a cell that Victor Vance would surely make sure I never left, I realized that the war was far from over. I had saved the princess, but I had just walked voluntarily into the dragon's dungeon, and I had absolutely no weapons left. The interrogation room at the 1st District Precinct was a masterclass in intimidation. It was a windowless concrete box painted a suffocating shade of gray, smelling of stale coffee and fear. My wrists were handcuffed to a metal ring on the table, the steel biting into my skin, but the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the cold fury simmering in my chest. The door buzzed and swung open. I expected a detective with a badge and a bad attitude. Instead, Victor Vance walked in. He looked unruffled. His tie was perfectly knotted, and he carried 2 cups of water, placing one out of my reach like he was teasing a dog. He dismissed the guard outside with a nod, and the heavy door clicked shut, sealing us in. "You put on quite a show." "Sharon," Victor said, leaning against the wall. His voice was smooth, lacking the hysterical edge he had displayed on stage. "Kidnapping, extortion, assaulting security personnel. The district attorney is talking about 20 years to life." I stared at him, keeping my breathing even. "I am not a kidnapper. Victor, I am the only reason that little girl is alive, and you know it." Victor chuckled, a low, dry sound. "It does not matter what I know. It matters what the jury believes. And right now, the narrative is perfect. The unstable, fired employee snatches the heiress for a ransom. I am the hero who got her back. You are just the villain of the week. By the time you get a trial, Arthur will be dead from natural causes, and I will be the legal guardian of the estate." He leaned in close, his cologne cloying and expensive. "Plead guilty. Sharon, I can make sure you get a facility with a library. Fight me, and I will make sure you disappear into general population." I opened my mouth to tell him exactly where he could shove his plea deal, but the door handle turned again. This time, it was not a polite entry. The door was shoved open with enough force to bounce off the rubber stop. Arthur Sterling wheeled himself into the room. He looked frail, his face pale under the fluorescent lights, but his eyes were burning with a terrifying intensity. He was flanked by 2 high-priced lawyers and the precinct captain, who looked nervous. "Arthur?" Victor started, his voice instantly shifting to a tone of concern. "You should not be here. The doctor said you need rest. This woman is dangerous. Get out," Arthur said. His voice was a rasp, but it carried the weight of a man who had built a city. Victor blinked. "Sir, I really think—" "I said get out," Arthur roared, slamming his hand on the armrest of his wheelchair. "Leave us, now." Victor hesitated, his eyes darting between me and the old man. He glared at me, a silent promise of retribution. Before smoothing his suit jacket and stepping out, the lawyers and the captain followed, leaving me alone with the billionaire. Arthur stared at me for a long time. The silence stretched, heavy and tense. "You told me to check the tea," he said finally. "Why?" "Because he is killing you," I said bluntly. "Arsenic poisoning. Low doses over a long period. It mimics heart failure. That is why you feel weak. That is why your hands shake." Arthur looked at his trembling hands. Then he looked at me. "That is a heavy accusation. Victor has been by my side for 15 years. You are a stranger who dragged my granddaughter through the streets for 3 days. Give me one reason why I should believe you and not lock you away forever." I did not beg. I did not cry. I sat up straighter, the chains on my wrists clinking. "I am a forensic auditor, Mr. Sterling. I do not deal in feelings. I deal in facts. You want proof? Give me a laptop." Arthur narrowed his eyes. "A laptop? Give me a computer with internet access." I said, "I do not need your private servers. I do not need your passwords. Victor is arrogant. He thinks he is smarter than everyone else, so he barely hid his tracks. I can find the evidence in your public financial filings in 10 minutes. Arthur studied my face, searching for deception. He must have seen something in my eyes, perhaps the same stubbornness he possessed, because he reached for the intercom on the table. "Bring in a laptop," he ordered, "and unlock her cuffs." 5 minutes later, my hands were free. I sat in front of a sleek tactical laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The pain in my wrists faded, replaced by the familiar, electric focus of the hunt. I pulled up the Securities and Exchange Commission database. I accessed Sterling Corp's quarterly reports from the last 2 years. I spun the laptop around to face him. "Look here," I said, pointing to a column of figures. "This is your research and development budget for the agricultural division. It spiked by 300% 18 months ago. We are investing in new fertilizer technology." Arthur said defensively, "Victor handles that personally." "No," I corrected him. "You are investing in a shell company called Chimera Logistics. Look at the vendor address. It is a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands. Now, look at this cross-reference." I pulled up a shipping manifest I had memorized weeks ago. Chimera Logistics does not buy fertilizer components. They import thallium and arsenic-based compounds, heavy metals. Mr. Sterling. I switched tabs, and here, the charitable foundation. You donated $5 million last quarter to the Vance Orphanage Initiative. "Victor is a philanthropist," Arthur muttered, though his voice was losing its certainty. "Does a philanthropist pay $4 million in consulting fees to a firm owned by his own brother-in-law?" I asked, highlighting the line item. "This money is not going to orphans. It is being washed and funneled back into offshore accounts under Victor's name. He is draining you dry, sir. He is liquidating your liquidity to prepare for a hostile takeover the moment you die." Arthur stared at the screen. The numbers were stark, black and white. They did not lie. He traced the lines on the screen with a shaking finger. I watched his face crumble as the betrayal took hold. The logic was irrefutable. The man he had trusted as a son was not only stealing his fortune, but was actively hastening his death. "But kidnapping Emily?" Arthur whispered, his voice broken. "Why?" "Leverage," I explained softly. "If you died, the estate would go to her. He needed to control her to control the money. When she ran away, his plan fell apart. That is why he was so desperate to find her, not to save her, to silence her." The door opened again. A young uniformed officer stepped in, holding a piece of paper gingerly. "Mr. Sterling?" the officer said. "The medics at the hospital said the little girl, Emily, was frantic. She insisted you see this. She drew it while they were treating her dehydration." Arthur took the paper. I leaned over to look. It was a crayon drawing, crude but terrifyingly detailed. It showed a stick figure lying in a bed. Arthur. Beside him was a tall figure in a blue suit, holding a cup. The tall figure had a speech bubble that said, "Drink it, old man." But it was the detail on the tall figure's hand that made the air leave the room. On the wrist of the figure in the blue suit, Emily had drawn a distinct, jagged red shape, a scar. Arthur gasped. He dropped the paper as if it were burning. "Victor," he breathed. "He has a scar on his right wrist. He got it from a boating accident 10 years ago. He always covers it with his watch." Emily could only see it if he was handing her something, or holding her down. The drawing also showed the tall figure pouring a bottle labeled bad juice into the cup. The combination of my cold, hard numbers and Emily's heartbreakingly innocent testimony shattered the last of Arthur's denial. The frailty seemed to evaporate from his body, replaced by a cold, hard rage that terrified me. This was the man who had crushed competitors and built an empire. He picked up his phone. He did not dial the police chief. He dialed a number from memory. "This is Arthur Sterling." He barked into the phone. "Initiate Protocol 0 immediately. Freeze all executive access for Victor Vance. Isolate the server nodes. And get my personal security detail to the precinct. I want them armed." He hung up and looked at me. His eyes were wet, but his jaw was set like granite. "I owe you an apology, Ms. Brookfield," he said. "And I owe you my life." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a key. It was a small, silver key that looked like it belonged to a safety deposit box. "You are free to go," he said. "The charges will be dropped within the hour. I will have my lawyers handle the press. You will be painted as a private contractor I hired to retrieve my granddaughter. A hero." "Thank you," I said, relief washing over me so hard I almost felt dizzy. "But," Arthur continued, leaning forward, his gaze locking onto mine, "I do not want you to just go. You found in 10 minutes what my entire internal audit team missed for 2 years. You have a gift, Sharon, and right now, I have a company filled with rats and a right-hand man who needs to be destroyed." He slid the laptop back toward me. "I am offering you a job, not as a standard auditor. I want you to be my special chief auditor. You report only to me. You have carte blanche access to every single file, every email, every bank account in Sterling Corp. I want you to find every cent Victor stole. I want you to build a case so watertight that he will not just go to prison, he will be buried under the prison." I looked at the laptop. I thought of the garage. I thought of my mother and Kevin, who were probably popping champagne right now, thinking I was finished. I thought of Victor Vance's smug face. I did not hesitate. I stood up and extended my hand, my grip firm. "I accept, Mr. Sterling, but I have one condition. Name it." "When we took him down," I said, a cold smile touching my lips, "I want to be the one who signs the final audit report, and I want my family to see it." "Done," Arthur said, shaking my hand. He turned his wheelchair toward the door. "Now, let's get you out of here. We have a lot of work to do, and I believe you need a wardrobe upgrade. A chief auditor cannot be seen wearing a prison jumpsuit." As I followed him out of the room, leaving the handcuffs on the table, I felt a shift in the universe. Sharon Brookfield, the victim, was dead. Sharon Brookfield, the executioner, had just clocked in. The transition from a freezing garage to the Sterling estate was violent in its luxury. I was not just given a room, I was given a wing. The shower in my private bathroom was larger than the entire space I had lived in for the past week, with water pressure that felt like a massage for my battered soul. I scrubbed the grease of the garage and the grime of the holding cell from my skin, watching the gray water swirl down the drain. With it went the old Sharon, the woman who apologized for existing. The next morning, a team of stylists arrived. Arthur had insisted. He said a chief auditor needed armor. And he was right. I stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror as they draped me in charcoal wool and midnight blue silk. I traded my worn-out sneakers for Italian leather heels that clicked with authority against the marble floors. When they were finished, I looked at my reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked dangerous. She looked expensive. She looked like someone who could tear a man like Victor Vance apart with a single spreadsheet. My days became a blur of high-stakes forensic warfare. Arthur converted the library into a war room. I sat at a mahogany desk that had likely belonged to a robber baron from the 1920s. surrounded by 3 monitors and a team of the sharpest corporate lawyers money could buy. We were not just looking for errors. We were performing an autopsy on a decade of corruption. I worked 18 hours a day. I followed the digital trail of crumbs Victor had left behind. I found the kickbacks from construction contracts disguised as consulting fees. I found the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland where he was siphoning off the dividends that should have gone to shareholders. It was a masterclass in embezzlement. But Victor had made one fatal error. He had gotten lazy. He had assumed Arthur was too sick to notice and that no one else would dare to look. But the mansion was not just a workspace. It became the home I never had. In the evenings, the atmosphere softened. We would eat dinner in the solarium. Arthur, Emily, and me. I watched the color return to Arthur's cheeks as he listened to Emily chatter about the garden or the new pony he had bought her. The haunted look in Emily's eyes began to fade, replaced by the light of a child who knew she was safe. One night, Arthur reached across the table and patted my hand. "You have saved us. Sharon," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Not just the company, us. I never had a daughter who cared about the business. I feel like I finally do." It was the validation I had craved my entire life, given to me by a stranger, while my own flesh and blood were likely plotting my downfall. And I was right. Across town, the narrative was shifting. My mother and Kevin had seen the news of my release. They had seen the paparazzi photos of me entering the Sterling estate in a limousine. Initially, they were terrified, expecting the police to kick down their door. But when the handcuffs did not come, their fear turned to a toxic mix of confusion and greed. They told the neighbors I had conned the old billionaire. They told the grocery store clerk that I was probably sleeping my way to the top. They could not conceive of a world where I succeeded on merit. Victor Vance smelled this weakness like a shark smells blood. He was desperate. His accounts were frozen. His access cards were revoked. He was pacing his penthouse, watching his empire crumble, and he needed a weapon. He found one in the suburbs. I found out about the meeting later through a private investigator Arthur had hired to watch my family. Victor had met Kevin at a dive bar on the south side. He had slid a briefcase across the sticky table. It contained $50,000 in cash. A pittance to Victor, but a fortune to my brother. "I need you to destroy her." Victor had told him, "I need the public to hate her so much that no jury will believe a word she says." Kevin took the money. Of course he took the money. 2 days later, I was in the war room, cross-referencing a suspicious wire transfer from the foundation, when Arthur rolled in. His face was thunderous. He held a remote control in his hand. "Do not turn on the TV," he warned, which was the surest way to make someone do exactly that. I picked up the remote from the desk and clicked the power button. It was a national talk show. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "The Dark Past of the Billionaire Savior." And there they were, Linda and Kevin, sitting on a plush sofa, looking like the survivors of a tragedy. Linda was dabbing her dry eyes with a handkerchief. Kevin was wearing a suit that was 2 sizes too small, looking solemn. "She has always been a pathological liar," Kevin was saying, looking directly into the camera. "We tried to get her help. We really did. But she was violent. She stole from us constantly. My college fund? Gone. Mom's retirement savings? Gone. She took it all to fund her gambling addiction." I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. I had paid for his community college classes, the ones he dropped out of. I funded Mom's retirement account. I had never gambled a day in my life. It got worse. She abused us. Linda sobbed, her performance worthy of an award. She would lock us out of the house in the winter. She forced her brother to sleep in the garage. That is why she took that poor little girl. She wanted to hurt us. She is a monster. The host looked shocked. "These are serious allegations, and now she is working for Arthur Sterling?" "She has tricked him," Kevin said earnestly, "just like she tricked us. She is a predator. Mr. Sterling is in danger." I watched as the audience gasped. I watched as the polls on the side of the screen shifted. Turning against me, the comments on social media were already scrolling by. Lock her up, con artist, gold digger, Arthur snatched the remote and turned the TV off. The room plunged into silence. "I will sue them," Arthur growled, his hands gripping the wheels of his chair so hard his knuckles turned white. "I will sue them for defamation. I will bankrupt them. I will have that station shut down." "No," I said. My voice was calm, eerily calm. I did not feel the sting of tears. I did not feel the crushing weight of betrayal. That part of me, the sister who wanted approval, the daughter who wanted love, had died in the snow outside the garage. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the sprawling grounds of the estate. I saw the beautifully manicured hedges. I saw the security guards patrolling the perimeter. I felt the weight of the gold Rolex Arthur had given me on my wrist. They had just played their final card. They had sold me out for $50,000 and 5 minutes of fame. They had lied to the world to protect a man who was poisoning a grandfather and hunting a child. They were not my family anymore. They were liabilities. And as an auditor, I knew exactly how to deal with liabilities. "Let them talk," I said, turning back to Arthur. "Let them pile the lies as high as they want. It just makes the fall harder." I walked over to the whiteboard where we had mapped out Victor's criminal network. I picked up a red marker. I drew a circle around Kevin's name, which I had added to the bottom of the chart. "Victor paid them," I said. "That $50,000 did not come from thin air. We trace that cash. We prove the connection. And then we do not just get Victor for embezzlement. We get him for witness tampering. We get him for conspiracy." I looked at Arthur, and for the first time, I let a smile touch my lips. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who has just realized the trap has been sprung. "And as for my mother and brother," I continued, capping the marker with a sharp click, "they want to be famous? Fine. I will make them famous. I will make sure the entire world sees the video footage from the security camera I installed in the garage 3 years ago, the one they forgot about, the one that shows who really slept in the cold." Arthur's eyebrows shot up. "You have footage?" "I keep receipts." "Arthur," I said, "I always keep receipts. It is time to take out the trash." The annual Sterling Corporation Gala was not just a party. It was a coronation, every year. The city's elite gathered in the grand ballroom of the Spire to drink champagne that cost more than a Honda Civic and pretend to care about charity. But this year, the script was different. This year, the gala was supposed to be the official passing of the torch. Victor Vance had arranged everything. The board was prepped, the press releases were drafted, and the narrative was set. Arthur Sterling was too frail to lead, and his loyal, heroic protege was stepping up to save the empire from the chaos caused by the criminal auditor. I stood in Arthur's study 3 days before the event, adjusting his tie. He looked vibrant. The color had returned to his face, and his grip was strong enough to crush a walnut. The chelation therapy we had secretly started was stripping the arsenic from his blood at a remarkable rate. "You have to look weaker." "Arthur," I said, handing him his cane, "if he smells even a whiff of recovery, he will run. He will liquidate the offshore accounts and vanish before the appetizers are served. We need him arrogant. We need him to feel safe." Arthur grunted, hating the deception. "I feel like I could run a marathon." "Sharon, I hate playing the invalid. It is just for one more night. I promised. Let him believe he has won. Let him believe the king is dead so he can try to put on the crown. That is when we take his head." The second part of the trap required bait for the bottom feeders. I sat at my desk and drafted a letter on Victor's stolen letterhead. I had become quite good at mimicking his voice, that specific blend of corporate buzzwords and condescension. "Dear Linda and Kevin," it read, "in light of your brave testimony against Sharon Brookfield, the board of Sterling Corp. wishes to honor you as special guests at our annual gala. We want to publicly acknowledge your suffering and your courage in exposing the truth. Please join us for a night of vindication." I signed it with a forgery of Victor's signature that would have fooled a handwriting expert. I slipped 2 VIP all-access passes into the envelope. These were not just tickets. They were golden tickets to a fantasy my family had been chasing their entire lives. I knew exactly what would happen next because I knew them better than I knew myself. I monitored their finances in real time. Within 2 hours of receiving the FedEx envelope, Kevin applied for a payday loan with a predatory interest rate of 300%. When that wasn't enough, Linda visited a pawn shop, trading in the pearl necklace my father had given her 30 years ago, the one she swore she would never sell, for a stack of cash. They did not use the money to pay off the debts I had left them with. They did not use it to fix the leaking roof. They rented a limousine. They went to the most expensive boutique on the Magnificent Mile. Kevin bought a tuxedo that shimmered under the lights, something gaudy and loud. Linda bought a gown covered in sequins that looked like a disco ball. They were investing in their image, convinced that this night would launch them into the social stratosphere. They thought they were going to rub shoulders with senators and CEOs. They thought they were finally getting the respect they deserved. The night of the gala arrived. The ballroom was a sea of black ties and tasteful diamonds. The air smelled of lilies and money. I was there. But not as a guest. I was a phantom. I wore a black velvet gown that blended perfectly into the shadows of the mezzanine balcony. I had cut my hair into a sharp bob and wore dark lipstick. From my vantage point, looking down through the glass railing, I could see the entire chessboard. Victor was in his element. He stood near the ice sculpture, holding a crystal tumbler of scotch, laughing with the chairman of the board. He looked relaxed. He checked his watch, a Patek Philippe that probably cost $50,000, and smiled. He was 45 minutes away from the announcement that would give him control of billions. Then, the doors swung open. A hush fell over the entrance as Linda and Kevin arrived. They did not walk. They strutted. Linda waved at people who had no idea who she was. Kevin was filming everything on his phone, likely live streaming to his followers. They looked like peacocks in a room full of ravens, loud, colorful, and painfully out of place. I watched Victor's face through a pair of opera glasses. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A flash of pure revulsion crossed his features as he saw the two people he had used as pawns waddling into his sanctuary. He clearly had not invited them. He must have been confused, wondering how they got past security. But Victor was a politician. He recovered instantly. He realized that their presence, while distasteful, was useful. They were the living proof of his heroism. He walked over to them, arms spread wide, putting on a performance worthy of an Oscar. "Linda, Kevin," he boomed, loud enough for the nearby reporters to hear. "I am so glad you could make it." I saw Linda practically melt. She curtsied, and Kevin shook Victor's hand with both of his. Nodding enthusiastically, "Mr. Vance," Kevin said, his voice carrying up to the balcony. "We wouldn't miss it. We are ready to tell the world the truth about Sharon." Victor guided them toward the bar, his hand hovering over Linda's back without actually touching the cheap sequins. I could read his lips perfectly. "Drink up," he said. "Tonight is your night. Later, I will bring you up on stage. We will finally put this whole ugly chapter to rest." He was going to parade them like circus animals. He was going to let them spew their lies to the shareholders to cement my reputation as a villain, ensuring that when he took over, no one would listen to my audit reports. I looked down at the heavy leather folder in my hands. Inside were 300 pages of evidence. I had the bank records showing the wire transfers from the orphanage fund to Victor's private holding company. I had the emails where he discussed the dosage of the arsenic with the supplier. I had the security footage from the garage, time-stamped and verified, showing Kevin kicking Emily and Linda screaming at me to get out. I had the receipts, every single one of them. Below me, the orchestra began to play a waltz. Waiters circulated with trays of caviar. My mother was laughing loudly, throwing her head back, drunk on champagne and delusion. Kevin was taking a selfie with a confused senator. Victor was checking his reflection in a window, straightening his tie, preparing for his victory lap. They were all so happy. They were all so sure. I checked my own watch. It was 8 o'clock. Arthur was backstage, sitting in his wheelchair, breathing deeply, waiting for my signal. The police commissioner, A man I had personally briefed an hour ago with the undeniable evidence was waiting in the kitchen with a squad of officers. I keyed my headset. Target is in position. I whispered, "The ego has landed. Initiate the protocol." I closed the folder with a satisfying snap. The time for hiding in garages was over. The time for crying over a family that never loved me was over. Tonight, I wasn't just an auditor. I was the karma they had all forgotten to account for. The spotlight hit Victor Vance, turning his navy suit into a beacon of authority against the velvet backdrop of the stage. He stepped up to the podium, gripping the edges with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. The applause was polite, restrained, the sound of people waiting to see which way the wind would blow. Down in the front row, my mother and brother were practically vibrating with anticipation. Kevin had his phone raised, filming vertically, desperate to capture the moment his fabricated victimhood propelled him into stardom. Linda was dabbing her eyes again, preparing for another performance of the grieving, betrayed grandmother. "Ladies and gentlemen, shareholders and friends," Victor began, his voice booming through the high-fidelity speakers. "Tonight is a night of mixed emotions. We celebrate the future of Sterling Corporation, but we also mourn the declining health of a titan. Arthur Sterling is a man I love like a father, and it breaks my heart to see the toll that recent events, specifically the criminal actions of a trusted employee, have taken on him." He paused for effect, looking down at my family with a mournful expression. "We have with us tonight the true victims of Sharon Brookfield's deception, her own mother and brother, who bravely stepped forward to expose her instability. Please, give them a round of applause." Linda stood up, waving awkwardly. Kevin puffed out his chest, soaking in the attention. I was standing in the technical booth at the back of the room, behind the sound engineer who was currently sweating through his shirt because two of the police officers I had brought with me were standing silently behind him. "Now," I said into my headset, "cut the feed." On stage, Victor opened his mouth to continue his eulogy for a man who was not dead, but the microphone went dead with a sharp screech of feedback. He tapped it, annoyed. Then, the massive LED screen behind him, which had been displaying the Sterling Corp logo, flickered. It went black for a heartbeat, plunging the stage into darkness. When it roared back to life, it was not playing a corporate sizzle reel. It was grainy, black and white footage. The timestamp in the corner read February 4th, 7 p.m. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It was the garage, my garage. The camera angle was high, looking down at the pile of dirty laundry in the corner, on the massive screen, 50 feet tall. Kevin walked into the frame. He looked at the laundry pile. He kicked it, hard. The pile moved. A small, terrified face appeared. Emily. The audio was piercingly clear, amplified by the concert-grade speakers. "Get up, you little rat," Kevin's voice sneered, echoing through the ballroom. "You are ruining my aesthetic." In the ballroom, Kevin dropped his phone. His face went the color of curdled milk. The video cut. New timestamp. February 5th. Linda appeared on screen, wrapped in her fur coat, pointing a manicured finger at me. "She has probably got diseases," Linda's voice shrieked. Shrill and cruel. "Lice. Hepatitis. Get it out of here. I will put your things on the curb." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was the silence of 1,000 wealthy, polite people realizing they were standing in the presence of monsters. I saw a woman in a diamond necklace cover her mouth in horror. I saw the senator Kevin had taken a selfie with step away from him as if he were radioactive. Victor turned around, staring at the screen in horror. "Turn it off," he screamed at the tech booth, waving his arms. "This is a hack. This is fake deepfake technology." "We are not done yet." "Victor," I whispered to myself. The video faded, replaced by a waveform visual, an audio recording. I increased the dosage to 3 milligrams. A voice said, it was smooth, arrogant, and unmistakably Victor Vance. A second voice, the supplier, answered, "That is risky. It shows up in hair follicles. The old man will be dead before anyone thinks to check his hair," Victor's voice replied, followed by a cold laugh. "Just send the invoice to the orphanage fund. I will sign off on it as construction materials." Victor Vance froze on stage. He looked like a statue of a man crumbling into dust. The glass of scotch slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. The sound distinct and final. Then, the double doors at the back of the ballroom did not just open, they were thrown wide. The orchestra stopped playing. Arthur Sterling walked in. He was not in a wheelchair. He was not shaking. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, walking with a stride that ate up the ground. On his left was Emily, holding his hand, looking like a princess in a blue dress. On his right was me. I walked with my head high, the velvet of my gown swishing around my ankles. My eyes locked on the stage. The crowd parted for us like the Red Sea. I heard whispers of, "Is that him?" and "She is the auditor." We walked straight to the stage. Victor backed away until he hit the podium. Trapped. Arthur took the stairs one by one, steady and strong. He walked up to the microphone, which miraculously started working again the moment he touched it. "Victor," Arthur said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a judge passing sentence. "You are fired." He turned to the stunned audience. "The man standing behind me is not my successor. He is a thief, a liar, and an attempted murderer. He poisoned me to seize my company. He tried to kidnap my granddaughter to ensure his control." Arthur reached out and pulled me forward. "The woman you have been told is a villain," he continued, placing a hand on my shoulder, "is the only reason I'm standing here today. Sharon Brookfield is not a kidnapper. She is the savior of this family. And as of this moment, she is the new Chief Financial Officer of Sterling Corporation." The room erupted. It was not polite applause this time. It was a roar of shock and awe. Flashes blinded us as the press went into a frenzy. "Arrest him," Arthur said calmly. 4 police officers swarmed the stage. Victor tried to run, tried to dodge past the screen, but he was tackled before he made it 3 steps. The image of the impeccable executive being pressed face first into the floor, cuffs clicking around his wrists, was broadcast live on the giant screen above him. "It is a lie!" Victor screamed as they dragged him away, his hair wild, his dignity gone. "She set me up! She is the criminal!" But nobody was looking at him anymore. They were looking at the 2 people freezing in the front row. Linda and Kevin were trying to inch toward the exit. They looked small. They looked cheap. The sequins on Linda's dress looked like trash under the house lights. "Going somewhere, Mom?" I asked into the microphone. They froze. The entire room turned to look at them. The looks of disgust were physical blows. These were people who valued reputation above all else, and my family had just been exposed as child abusers and liars. "Sharon," Linda stammered, her voice trembling, audible even without a mic in the silent room. "We were forced. Victor threatened us." "Liar," Kevin shouted, turning on her instantly. "It was her idea. She wanted the money for the dress." "I have the bank transfer records," I said coldly, looking down at them from the stage. $50,000. That was the price of your loyalty. That was what you sold me for." The crowd murmured. "Disgusting," someone said loudly. But the night had one final humiliation in store. A commotion broke out near the entrance. A large man with a thick neck and a suit that strained at the seams was pushing past the security. He was not a guest. He was the kind of man who collected debts in cash and teeth. "Hey," the man shouted, pointing a thick finger at Kevin. "There he is, the big shot." Kevin's eyes bugged out. "No," he whimpered. "Not here." The man marched right up to the front row. Ignoring the stunned socialites, he grabbed Kevin by the lapel of his shiny, rented tuxedo. "You said you were going to be rich tonight, kid," the loan shark growled. "You said you were going to be on the payroll. Where's my $10,000? Plus the interest for the suit rental?" I, Kevin stammered, sweat pouring down his face, melting his stage makeup. "He is broke," I announced from the stage, twisting the knife. "And he is unemployed. I would get your collateral now if I were you. The loan shark didn't hesitate. He ripped the expensive watch off Kevin's wrist, a rental, probably, and then, in a move that made the crowd gasp and then titter nervously, he grabbed the jacket of the tuxedo and yanked it down, ripping the seam right down the back. I will take the shoes too, the shark snarled. Kevin stood there, half naked in a ripped suit, sobbing, while the loan shark started unlacing his patent leather shoes in the middle of the ballroom. Linda was sitting on the floor, weeping into her hands, as the flashing bulbs of the paparazzi captured every second of their absolute ruin. I watched them. I watched the people who had thrown me into the snow now drowning in their own greed. Arthur leaned over to me. Is it enough? He asked quietly. I looked at Emily, who was holding her grandfather's hand and smiling. I looked at the police dragging Victor out the side door. I looked at my brother shivering in his socks. Yes, I said, feeling a weight lift off my chest that I hadn't realized I was carrying for 34 years. It is enough. I turned my back on them and walked toward the future. The garbage had been taken out. The adrenaline of the ballroom began to fade the moment the heavy brass doors of the Sterling Spire swung shut behind us. The roar of the crowd, the flashbulbs, and the scent of expensive perfume were replaced by the biting clarity of the Chicago winter wind. It was the same wind that had frozen my tears in the garage just a week ago. But tonight, wrapped in a cashmere coat that cost more than my mother's entire wardrobe, I could not feel the cold. I felt impenetrable. Arthur was waiting by the curb. The rear door of his customized limousine held open by a driver. Emily was already inside, clutching a cup of hot cocoa, her eyes drooping with exhaustion, but her smile bright and safe. I took a step toward the car, ready to leave my past on the pavement. But the past was not done with me yet. Sharon! Sharon, please! The voices were shrill, desperate, and pathetic. I stopped and turned slowly. Linda and Kevin came rushing out from the side entrance, bypassing the security line. They looked like the survivors of a natural disaster. Kevin was shivering violently in his socks, his ripped tuxedo jacket flapping in the wind, his face streaked with sweat and mascara. Linda was stumbling in her heels, her sequined dress looking garish and cheap under the harsh streetlights. They did not scream at me this time. They did not demand it. They threw themselves at the concrete steps of the hotel entrance, sliding on their knees until they reached me. Linda grabbed the hem of my velvet gown with dirty hands, her grip frantic. Sharon, wait, she sobbed, looking up at me with eyes that were swollen with terror. You cannot leave us here. That man, that loan shark, is waiting for us in the parking lot. He said he is going to break Kevin's legs if we do not have the money by midnight. I am sorry, Sharon, Kevin wailed, pressing his face against my shoe. I swear to God, I am sorry. I was stupid. I was jealous. But I am your brother. You cannot let them hurt me. You have millions now. Just pay him off. Please. $10,000 is nothing to you now. I looked down at them. A week ago, this sight would have broken me. A week ago, I would have drained my savings, sold my car, and begged on the street to save them because I thought that was what love required. I thought that if I just gave enough, if I sacrificed enough, they would finally see me. But as I watched my mother clutch my dress, weeping about how I was her most filial daughter and how blood is thicker than water, I felt nothing. No anger, no hate, no triumph, just a vast, cold emptiness, like looking at strangers through a pane of thick glass. We can start over, Linda pleaded. Sensing my silence as hesitation, we will be a family again. I will make your favorite dinner. Kevin will move out of the room. You can have the master bedroom back. We will treat you like a queen. Sharon, just help us this one last time. I gently pulled my dress from her grip. I took a step back, creating a physical distance that matched the emotional chasm between us. You are looking for the wrong person, I said softly. My voice was not loud, but in the crisp night air, it sounded like a gavel striking a sounding block. What? Kevin blubbered. wiping his nose on his sleeve. "What are you talking about? You are Sharon. You are our sister." I shook my head slowly, looking down at them with a pity that was far worse than hatred. "The daughter you are looking for," I said, looking directly into Linda's eyes. "Died in that cold garage. You killed her the night you chose a stranger's money over her life. You froze her heart when you let her sleep next to the rats while you sat in the warmth. The woman standing in front of you is the chief financial officer of Sterling Corporation, and she does not know you." "Sharon, no!" Linda shrieked, reaching out again. "You have a debt to pay," I said, turning away. "I suggest you start working. I hear the night shift at the warehouse is hiring." I walked to the limousine. Arthur extended a hand to help me in. I slid onto the leather seat next to Emily, who leaned her head against my shoulder immediately. "Drive," I told the chauffeur. The heavy door thudded shut, sealing out the sound of my mother screaming my name and my brother sobbing into the concrete. Through the tinted glass, I watched them shrink into the distance as we pulled away, two small, miserable figures kneeling in the snow, trapped in the prison of their own making. I did not look back. 6 months later, the view from the 45th floor of the Sterling Spire was breathtaking. Chicago lay spread out beneath me like a circuit board of light and energy. The office was silent, a sanctuary of glass and steel. On my desk, a nameplate made of solid obsidian read, "Sharon Brookfield, CFO." I took a sip of my espresso and opened the thick file in front of me. It was titled, "Project Clean Slate." Victor Vance was currently serving the first year of a 25-year sentence at a federal penitentiary. My testimony, backed by the mountain of forensic evidence I had compiled, had been devastating. He had lost everything: his money, his reputation, and his freedom. As for my family, I heard through the grapevine that the house had been foreclosed on. Kevin was working at a car wash, and Linda was living in a small apartment 2 towns over. I did not check on them. I did not send money. I had closed that ledger permanently. I was not alone anymore. The door to my office opened, and Emily skipped in, dropping her backpack on the sofa. She was taller now, healthy, and wearing a school uniform. "Grandpa says we are ordering Thai food tonight," she announced, hopping onto the chair opposite my desk. "And he says you have to stop working because it is Friday, and we promised to watch a movie." Arthur rolled in behind her. Looking healthier than he had in a decade, he was still using the wheelchair occasionally, but the tremor in his hands was gone. He looked at me with a warmth that I now knew was genuine paternal love. "She is right, Sharon," Arthur smiled. "The numbers will still be there on Monday. Come home." I looked at the file. I looked at the city below, where I had once been invisible, and then I looked at the 2 people in front of me who knew exactly who I was and loved me for it. "You are right," I said, closing the folder with a satisfying snap. "Let's go home." I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked out of the office, leaving the lights of the city to burn on without me. I had rebuilt the empire. I had taken my revenge. But the greatest victory was not the corner office or the millions in the bank. It was the simple, quiet peace of walking out the door with a family that would never leave me in the cold. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please leave a comment down below and let's get a conversation started. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, make sure to subscribe to the Blue Payback channel, hit that like button, and smash the hype button so we can share this story with even more people.